So, I'm guessing that by now you've probably had at least one experience with AI that's left you genuinely impressed. But if you're like most people, you're probably stuck in that annoying loop of trying to get consistent outputs. Some days it's amazing, and some days it's just average, and you can't seem to figure out what's changing. Well, if that's you, then this is the perfect video because today I'm going to be sharing 7 fixes to help you get consistent and amazing outputs, not just twice, but as many times as you need them. Okay, so without wasting any time, let's get straight into point number 1, which is don't use LLMs when code can do the job. So let me quickly explain. Let's say that you ask 10 different people the same question. You're going to get 10 answers, right? Maybe 6 of them are the same answer, just packaged slightly differently, but 4 of them are going to be probably a complete wrong answer. And that's fine. If you're in the ideation phase or you're trying to brainstorm or figure things out, then variation can be really good. And it's the same thing with LLMs. If you ask 10 different models the same question, you'll get the same 10 different answers. But sometimes you just need the right answer every single time, right? Okay, so as an example, I'm not going to use a code example or a software example or whatever. I'm going to use one from just every day. You might want to know what the top 5 movers or the top 10 movers were in the S&P 500, for example. Let's say that you want to get a bit more clued up on the markets and you want to figure out what the top 5 winners and losers were. This is a type of question that a lot of people would reach to LLMs for. You'll ask ChatGPT or Claude or whatever for these top 5 movers. And we can start seeing why this might be a problem. Firstly, this is going to take quite a long time, right? It has to go and figure out all 500 stocks. It has to get their open and close prices. It has to figure out which day you're talking about, right? So obviously it did pick 7th of August, but the last trading day is pretty vague. It has to get that from system metadata. There's just a whole bunch of issues with this setup. And if you're lucky, you'll get the right answer, but that depends on the model. It depends on the capabilities that you've set, and it depends on a lot of things. As you can see, I was talking for that whole time, and it's now put together a list, which I'm honestly quite impressed with, to be real, but I still haven't really checked this. I'm not 100% sure if these numbers are right. I don't have the confidence, and I would have to go and manually check this stuff myself. But on the other hand, this is a perfect task for code. So I'm not going to walk through this chat, but essentially I had a relatively short chat with Claude Code. And at the end of the day, I've got something which I can open in a browser. You can see I've done 3 separate runs and I've got identical answers each time. And this is based on actual data now. It's pulling data from Yahoo Finance and it's running just pure mathematical calculations. And I have pretty much 100% confidence in this result. And we can see here it's saying that Airbnb has moved 17.43%. And if I go and over to Apple stocks and check, we can see 17.43%. So 2 points quickly before we wrap up with fix number 1, and that is just because LLMs can do something, as we've seen in this example, doesn't mean that they should. Some tasks are just always going to be handled better by code, and that's okay. And the second thing is use Claude Code to write the code. In this example, I barely wrote any of the code. I, in fact, didn't write any of the code, and I've got an answer that I can verify and that actually runs. And this segues quite nicely into point number 2 or fix number 2, which is that you can actually write tests to verify that output. And so what do I mean by this? Well, one of the gripes that we're saying that we have is that we don't get consistent outputs. And the beauty with code is that you can write tests to ensure that you get consistent outputs. So in this example, I created some dummy data with a set of 6 companies that I know the answer to. So I know which are the top movers. And now when I run the tests, it gives me all tests passed. But what it's actually checking in the background is for those 6 companies that I have pre-coded, did it spit out the right answer? And why is that useful? Well, this looks really ugly now. So if I actually wanted to do this properly, I would now move on to fixing the UI and maybe hosting this somewhere and whatever. And with tests, I can actually do that with confidence because each time I make changes, I just run the tests again. And I can now ensure that I'm getting the correct answer. So that wraps up the job section of this video, which is finding the right tool for the job. And with just that, you'll already find a huge improvement to the consistency of your outputs, which is what you want, right? But if you're thinking, come on, man, there's got to be more, hit that like button. But yes, you're right, there is more, and that's what we're getting onto now. The next 2 fixes have to do with the input, and it's not something which I've heard a lot of people talking about. So fix number 3 is get it out of your head first and into a clear and concise format. Before you touch any of the build section, you need to make sure that you have a really crystal clear idea of what you actually want to do. So a super recent example of this for me was when I was able to build an app that I've been wanting to build for ages in quite literally a day. And the main reason that I was able to make such big progress was by having quite a lengthy chat here with Claude. Maybe I probably spent about 2 or 3 hours not talking to Claude, but walking around thinking about what I wanted to do, coming back, and eventually building out this drum sketch app plan, which I refined throughout the course of the chat. But I was able to build out this drum sketch plan. And once I had this plan, it led to not quite a one-shot build with Claude Code, but pretty close to it. And so, yeah, this ideation phase and just straightening out your ideas is such a useful thing. Something which I also would like to just add quickly is that during these sessions, I usually dictate. And I find that just speaking is a much more natural way of getting your thoughts across. And a lot of the time, as you can see, it's quite effective. A lot of the time, it leads to actually clarifying your own thoughts as you speak. And building on from that quite nicely is fix number 4, which is if you know what you want to do, then just tell the AI what you want to do. AI can be really good at figuring out solutions, but if there's something that you know what you want to do, then just tell it. And some of the best outputs that I've ever gotten and most consistent have been when I've known what I want to do. I just don't necessarily want to implement the solution myself. And the AI is able to bridge that gap between I've got the idea, I know how I want to execute, the AI executes, and then I can review what it's got at the end. And that in itself can become a really, really streamlined workflow for producing super high quality work at a pace that's way faster than what you're doing right now. So moving on from the input, let's now talk about the context, and in particular, the context window. Now, this is probably my favorite thing to talk about. If you don't know what the context window is, it's basically a token limit of how much stuff the AI has processed in a session. So each word you can think of in a simplified form, you can think of each word as a token. And during the session, the AI consumes input tokens and outputs output tokens, of course. And these tokens make up the context window. There are a couple of papers that go into depth on context rot and on this kind of topic, but it's time for me to break out my lethal Excalibur skills. Not quite, but anyways, this has been my experience with context and with context rot. So the experience that I've had is that at the start of a conversation, the AI is not super helpful because it doesn't have any context. You then give it context in the form of tokens on this is my project, this is my standards, this is how I like to work, this is what I want. All of that is context, and its usefulness grows and grows and grows until it reaches this point of peak usefulness over here. After that point, it starts to degrade. And if you've ever noticed that towards the end of a session, the thing just stops listening to you, it breaks your rules, you find yourself going, hey, I've told you so many times not to do this. The reason for that is this context rot. And so what happens is when you're in this zone over here, the LLM is finding it a lot harder to remember all of your stuff from back here. Yes, this is improving all the time as they figure out how to do the search better and as they figure out how to do caching better and all of that stuff. But the point still remains that as you get towards the end of a session, or as you get towards the end or the upper limit of your token cap, the output or the quality of the output starts to degrade. To make it a bit easier to remember, you can kind of just think of you at the end of a long day, right? You're just not quite as sharp as you were in the morning. Anyways, here's a few tips on how to manage that context window better. So they are quite simply try and limit your chats or your sessions to one main task plus follow-ups. So follow-ups would be, okay, this is great, but I want the button to be blue, not red, because it already has the context of what it's just built. So there's no real point in starting a new chat for a follow-up. And the same thing goes if you've just been having a whole long conversation and you just want to make one correction or a couple of follow-ups, do them in the same chat or session. The second thing is then clear the context window when you're ready for the new task or the new concept. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. You can just start a new chat, or you can run /clear if you're using Claude code. Basically, once you've done your one main task and follow-ups, you want to clear that context. And then the last thing is only store things useful for every session or every chat in a system prompt. So if you don't know what a system prompt is, it's like your project instructions if you're using chats, if you've seen project instructions, or it's your claude.md or agents.md if you're using code. Basically, this is sent with every chat to the LLM. And a lot of people have ended up with huge, huge, huge files. I saw a YouTuber who had something like 13 pages for picking a thumbnail. That can be useful, but you definitely don't want that being sent as context for every single chat. So only keep things that you're going to use in every chat in those system prompts. Okay, and then moving quickly on to fix number 6, never get your agent or the AI at the end of a chat, at the end of a long task, to plan the next task. This is something that I used to do all the time, and it's a mistake that really cost me a lot. The problem with that is we've just spoken about it. The end of the session is the worst time to plan for a new task that you're trying to do. And what ends up happening is when you start the new task with this plan, the AI doesn't bother to go and check if this plan is actually good or not. And you end up with just a poor execution based on the fact that you planned at the end of a long context window. So fix number 6, don't use the end of your session to plan your future work. And finally, fix 7, and you probably expected this one sooner, but this is in fact the model. So I'm not talking about ChatGPT versus Claude versus Grok, but rather I'm talking about tailoring the model that you use and the effort level to the task that you're trying to achieve. So check this out. So for quick context, when I'm talking about the model, I'm talking about this. So from a smaller model to a larger model. And when I'm talking about effort level, I'm talking about this. So from low effort to max effort. And this is quite interesting. This is from an Anthropic paper or something that they sent out. And it's got to do with picking the right model and effort for the task. So it turns out that on a routine task, the smaller model is roughly as good as a larger model, and lower effort is roughly as good as higher effort. So let's see this in action. They're saying that the tokens spent per task, which is also cost and time, right, which is really important, increases going to the right, and the quality of the result increases going upwards. And so we can see that for a smaller model on medium and max effort, the tokens cost and time is quite moderate, whereas for a larger model, it is just increasing. So medium on a larger model is more than max on a smaller model. And this is for a about the same level of quality, right? So my conclusion here is for a super routine task, just pick a smaller one on lower effort, and then you're saving both time and tokens, okay? But for a more difficult task, the picture changes a bit. So here I've written that the larger model is now significantly better than the smaller model. And what you want to do now is play around with the effort levels. So if we look at the curve here, the reason I say we should play around with the effort levels is that the larger model is just clearly better than the smaller model in terms of the quality of the result, right? We can see that this red line is higher than this blue line almost every step of the way. The thing that becomes really interesting is that a larger model on medium effort costs less and responds faster and gives you about the same quality of output as the smaller model on max effort, which now costs a lot more and takes a lot longer. And it turns out that for more complex tasks, these smaller models can often get themselves tied up in a knot and end up spending way more money and time than a larger model just because it's really getting confused. So my tip here is that you should start with a larger model on a lower effort level and then scale up the effort level as you need. And just finally, just never use max effort. It just never goes well. It just overthinks and it takes forever. So my hot take is never use max effort. So there we have it. 7 fixes to get you more consistent responses and outputs when working with AI, covering the job, the inputs, the context, and finally the model. Let me know which one of these stood out most to you and subscribe if you're keen to see more of this. Cheers, guys.